Hope you had a great reception last night, a great dinner, and are fully caffeinated for this. You already saw we were having a spirited discussion in the back. Like we've already been getting going. And that's because I feel like we have a pretty spicy topic this morning for our discussion on this final morning of Brainstorm Tech. I'm Sharon Goldman. I'm a reporter at Fortune. I cover AI. And we're here to ask the question, what kind of coworker will AI become? With a great group of speakers, really excited here. But before we get started, I want to make sure I thank our partner for today's session. As you can see, it is Lenovo, so thank you so much. And just some housekeeping, this session is on the record. And, we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. If you do have questions, I'll be coming to you after I get the discussion going. Just raise your hand and we'll be sure to get to you and make sure to state your name and company before asking your question. And just around the mics, you probably know this already from some of the other discussions, but there's a little button with a face and that looks like noise is coming out of it, and you just press that to talk and make sure to turn it off when you're done, kind of like mute and unmute on Zoom. And now I'd like to introduce our discussion leaders. We have Vijay Gopal, Global Offering Executive, Digital Workplace Solutions at Lenovo. And next to Vijay, we have Lorena Yi, Senior Partner and Technology Council Chair at McKinsey & Company. We have Athena Karp, General Manager, HiredScore and Workday, and Ali Akhtar, co-founder and CEO of Letter AI. Okay, so Vijay, I'm gonna get started with you. I feel like one of the interesting things about thinking of AI as a coworker, which we've all started to have more in our discourse, the idea of a co-pilot. As soon as ChatGPT came out in November 2022, I think a lot of people were immediately thinking how this could help me at work, writing emails and doing code and things like that. And yet I can't help feel that we've been talking about digital transformation in the workplace for decades now. I've certainly been writing about it for probably that long, everything from cloud to, even when the internet first started, now we have tools like Slack. What makes this transformation around generative AI so different and such a big deal? Is this really just organizations having FOMO and feel like they need to get this in their companies, and then, do the benefits kind of outweigh people's, immediate fears around things like job displacement? How would you characterize that?
Yeah. So
make sure you turn on.
Yeah, thanks. I'm terrible with technology, and I know nothing about AI. So if you talk about AI, I always was very interested in AI, but never spent much time in AI. There was a lot of investment that went in. There was never much return out of AI. 20, 30 years, it was always a promise, and you could never see how the promise will get realized. But 6 months ago or 2 years ago, it changed. So I started getting interested in this space probably 1 year ago. So when I look at AI, the impression that I have, based on what I've seen and heard, that this is one single opportunity that we have as mankind to achieve perfection. If you look at 2,000 years ago, you look at philosophers and others, we always said, okay, what is a perfect life? What is a perfect society? What is a perfect human being? How can we go organize ourselves? And I believe now, looking at all the developments and what is the art of the possible, this is that moment. So either we can seize it or we can squander it. So if we go in the right direction, I can see that we'll get to a much better place. Now, there's a lot of questions as to applicability, the governance of it, the ethics of it, regulating it and controlling it. So my view is that, okay, it is a technology, and if you're really an optimist, you would use AI everywhere. And the reason for that, I look at it and say that, okay, let's look at world in general, right? The world income is around 120 million. Let's assume that, okay, a decent life is around 250K gives you a decent life. So that means that, okay, hardly around 3 to 4% will have a decent life if you assume equitable distribution among the 3 to 4%. But let's assume 2%. So if AI can do 50 times what a human can do in any field, we will be able to provide the kind of richness or comfort that 2% enjoy to everyone, right? And 50 times is not that big a deal. At the moment, we may be at 2 times or 3 times, but we can go look at monitor AI's utility in that ratio and see that where is that tip over point where we can actually benefit a lot of people, and that should drive applicability. It's not the fears, it's not what AI will take control and do to us, it's about utility and how do we manage it. And we can manage it, right? The models are models within our control. We can have belief systems for it. We can have set boundaries. We can set constraints so that we can control it. It's not uncontrollable. So the fear of uncontrollability is what is causing us to be anxious about it. But I think it's a big promise. And I think we should embrace it and try and drive better outcomes out of it.
So what about applicability, though? Lorena, I kind of wanted to, get down to the brass tacks of it. What does AI adoption in workplaces mean for employees? You talked to me about, the trillions of dollars that it can mean for the economy, the tasks that it could potentially replace, up to 60, 70% of the tasks that people do every day. So are employees ready for this? Are organizations ready for this?
Yeah. I think maybe to build off of Vijay's piece, one of your questions is, why is this different from the 40 years of AI that we've already been on a path for the,
That's right.
More than 40 years of automation technologies we've looked at? And I think one thing to step back is this is the first major technology shift that actually addresses knowledge work. So if we kind of look at the eras of economic productivity, we first, have machines that help with physical labor. Then we started to look at transactions, and that's all the automation technologies that we've been implementing in our companies. This is the first one that really addresses a substantial and meaningful amount of knowledge workers. That's all of us. And that is a very different technology opportunity. So I just wanted to kind of frame that. And so when you say that, we were talking earlier, 60 to 70% of tasks of knowledge workers, people like us, executives, managers, physicians, all these types of work, engineers, what that is these are not wholesale replacement of jobs. The analysis is looking at different types of activities that we do. And this is a technology that can help actually create a massive amount of productivity for the individual. So even if you don't hit the highest range of that, imagine if you had 20% of your time in an average week given back to you. And it's a phenomenal question. How would you use that time differently? Would you use it for things that are uniquely human, that machines will never touch, which is this human interaction, this in-person piece? Would you use it to increase productivity? Would you use it to decrease costs? Would you reconfigure how your teams get work done? Those are some of the kind of longer term questions, but the moment we're in is this first inning of what will take a decade or two to fully digest and integrate into how we work and live. But we're starting to see this profound shift of what is the art of the possible. And I think when we look at this, I often think about it in a really bifocal way. There's unbelievable, fantastic things you could imagine in the long run. I mentioned 4.4 trillion of economic productivity. I think we all are in search of growth. You could imagine, a team that is a hybrid of both machines and humans and how you could work together. I mean, there are a whole bunch of future scenarios that you can imagine. But if you think about bifocal, that's kind of in the long run, the change is really profound. In the short run, what we're finding are really practical applications of using generative AI to increase time in my day. And one of the things is that the hero use cases tend to be taking toil out of our work so that you can increase joy. A lot of the tasks that it's really good at are not things we really enjoy. And so the example I gave you before is, if you're a software engineer, do you really want to spend time doing code modernization between legacy code and Python? Like, yeah, you did it at school, you had your chops, but like if the machine can do that and you can think about creating new software, designing new solutions for humans, that's like much more exciting. And every job category that we look at has an example like this, like summarizing meetings. Do we all really want to spend a ton of time?
Fun.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd rather know what the takeaways are and kind of move to the next step. So I think that, when we have this bifocal lens, we can dream together in this breakfast about some of the unbelievable long-term ways that we can reimagine work and society. But I think one thing is, and I think that's very optimistic, but I think in the near term, call it the next year or two, the applications and deployments we're seeing are incredibly practical, and they're getting at a portion of work we haven't been able to get to before. So I hope that helps with some grounding.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of leads to a question I have for Athena. I think the thing is, though, that's very optimistic, but of course we know for ourselves and for all our peers, we all have fears about what could come in the future when AI, is potentially taking over more and more tasks. I think it's clear that workers have concerns, and that comes in a number of different ways we talked about. I mean, there's the applications themselves, and are those applications biased towards different groups of people? Are they ethical? Are they responsible? And then there's the issue of how workers are using them and how they experience using them too. So I was wondering if you can talk about that. How do organizations deal with this if they're going to make this work for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started my company, which is now part of Workday, 11 years ago, which was early in this revolution, to figure out how we make hiring more fair and efficient. So we started with, how does the AI change something that we felt was inherently flawed and not delivering on the job access and opportunities that jobs could or should. And so I think when you think of the fairness and the responsible AI piece, in your question, there's really two branches of it. One is, how do we ensure the AIs that we're leveraging across the workforce have the right controls, checkpoints, the right governance, right? So one of the places we focused on was AI for HR, which actually it's a great place to think about, because HR has always been the stewards of governance within orgs. So there's so much clarity already within HR, which is, what is biased decisions that we're not supposed to do? What are the laws that govern hiring, promotions, fairness? What are best practices? And most of the time HR spends today is helping the org align to the exact governance laws, principles, and processes that ensure the best possible employee experience, that ensure hiring fairness. And I think if you think of the opportunities there, it's with AI, it's actually, we have metrics for humans today. AI enables us to have metrics for technologies that humans don't have today, right? So if we think of hiring as a great example, there's so many ways we can ensure the data we learn from is even, right, and balanced. Even if people don't apply at even ratios, that doesn't mean the system has to learn from imbalanced data. We have a lot of methods to correct that. Number two is, how do you have explainability and make sure that you can audit every single decision that an AI took? How do you have bias audits and test the AI in isolation to make sure it's fairly treating everyone? But then there's a whole new class of metrics that we wish we could evaluate humans against, which is, for example, everyone that applies was treated in a consistent way and evaluated against the same criteria. I don't know of a way that we measure humans for that. With the technology, we can absolutely put in place a measurement that says, was this all consistent, and was each and every person that applied, or was I biased because of a school they went to, or I saw my hometown, or I saw a street that a friend grew up on. You can't govern that in humans. You can ensure and test for that in technology. And then I think the second piece that you asked was about how do employees experience or perceive the benefits or the downsides or the risks of AI augmenting across the workforce. And I think that's really up to the era that we're going into now, which is, how do orgs design the right pockets of places to deploy and leverage these technologies? How do you think about, I think if we think of HR, which is, very important to people, but also an area where we have so much opportunity, you can think of an employee today, I think top 3 reasons employees are dissatisfied is they don't feel promotions are fair. They don't feel they're looked at for jobs. They don't feel that politics didn't seep into who got promoted and how. And that's a great example of it all falls on a manager to navigate your career and navigate your growth. And in many ways, managers don't know the opportunities that exist outside of their team or don't know their own biases of holding someone back and holding their potential. And AI deployed into this, they don't see any of that. They see a person could be all these things. They can bring that to the person directly. They can augment a manager's lack of awareness of other people like this person. What are things they went on to do and become, and how do you bring that into that kind of employee's horizon and perspective? So I think it's up to us to make sure to identify the right places where the work is not even getting done today, and it's not getting done at the level that really truly benefits the people that we're here to serve, and so more use cases like that.
That makes sense. It is called human resources, after all. Well, I want to, in just a minute, I want to take a few questions, so I'm hoping that you're caffeinated enough for that in just a minute. But I want to ask Ali about some of the most common, most popular, most useful, I guess, use cases that you're seeing out there. You were talking a little bit about the developers in your company. Your company, I believe, also focuses on providing an AI tool for sales forces. So can you talk a little bit about actual use cases at work?
Yeah, there are a number of them available right now, and I think that number of use cases is going to continue to grow and expand as the technology gets better and better over time. And I'm someone who's been in AI sort of my entire career. I was at doing sort of deep learning on the edge at Samsara for some time. Was at McKinsey, the analyst on one of those reports where you hear the 4.4 trillion number. I had the job of like calculating that. And so kind of looking at it from a number of different perspectives, I think the really amazing thing about where we're at now is there are things that just weren't possible before that are possible now. So AI is becoming a fundamental building block in terms of how you design applications. So what that means is there's a number of use cases that are, working exceptionally well right now, and a number of use cases that are not quite there yet, but will get there as we get to GPT-5 and kind of progress happens. So the ones that are working exceptionally well right now are use cases where you're analyzing unstructured data and making sense of that unstructured data in a way that, again, wasn't possible before. So going back to the use case around software development, so at Letter, we are deep in this, where all of our software engineers, in fact, when we interview folks, we give them bonus points if they pull up their favorite AI Copilot tool.
Really?
Yeah, because this is the way kind of the world is headed, right?
Wow.
Like, this is a fundamental tool now in your tool belt, and the folks who are kind of really doing exceptionally well here are actually deploying it and using it in the right way. So in software development, it's exceptionally powerful. There's, I think to your point around converting code from, COBOL to Python, right? There are functions that you write that are just like boring, meticulous work. You can automate that entirely with AI. So that's an exceptional use case. Another one, which, Lenovo, we're happy to have as one of our partners and customers, when it comes to things like scaling, training, and coaching, that's something that AI does uniquely well that wasn't possible before. So we have a product at Letter, we call it like AI Roleplay, where you can spin up a mock AI customer. And similar to that, like Scarlett Johansson type of voice that you probably heard in the GPT-4o demo.
Please say it's not another Scarlett Johansson voice.
The voice actor who happened to sound like Scarlett Johansson. We have that sort of technology where you can spin up a mock AI customer and have a full conversation, have that AI push back on you on pricing and objection handling, and you can do that before you ever go into a call with a customer, right? That sort of thing in the pre-AI days, pre-generative AI days, meant your sales manager had to sit down with hundreds of sales representatives and do that role play. And now you can do that first pass with an AI. When you achieve a certain score, then you can be promoted to having that conversation with the sales manager. So there's a lot of use cases like that. And then I'll just conclude with use cases where I don't think AI is a strong fit yet. And we've actually held off on pushing these features to production because we think it's gonna potentially cause more risk than it's going to solve problems. And I think that's typically where you have processes that have fairly deterministic outcomes, meaning like if you put a certain set of inputs, it's usually best to get a certain set of outputs back. And often what that ends up being is like a lot of data analysis type of tools where with some of our customers, we're quite interested in, we want to build essentially we want to see a certain set of metrics delivered to our inbox every week. Can we use generative AI for this? We're like, well, that sounds like a dashboard. It sounds like you could write a SQL query that'll give you the right answer every time, instead of taking a chance with AI and, one day you got $10 million in ARR, the other day you got, 8.7 or something like that. And so I think there's going to have to be a lot of advancements that need to happen before those kind of tasks are really ripe for AI to automate.
Or Ali, we were talking about this in the
Yeah.
which is, that would also be a great example of, it's not generative AI, it's AI, or it could just be analytics.
Exactly.
And you might want to use all three of those A's in your business, because generative AI is not the one answer for everything. It's a really good answer for some things, and we also have and been using other analytics and machine learning and things that were good. The other thing is, I love your example earlier, just to give a little more business context. When we've seen this in customer care, I always call it the triple win, because NPS customer scores go up, call resolution time goes down, and the one piece that has been the best part of that triple win is employee satisfaction. In almost all the early cases we've seen goes up. And the reason is because, as you describe in your case, which is so great, they are able to do their jobs better.
Yeah.
And if I were to make that really pragmatic to your point about cost of living or your living standards, if you are going to be highly rated at the end of the year because you handled customer care better and you onboarded faster and you didn't deflect as many calls, you're going to get paid more. And
We
so
like that.
that is a good thing. Like, that is a really good thing.
I think hearing all three of you is making me really excited. The reason being that I'm extremely lazy. And I'm looking at the use cases that you're talking about. It tells me that there is a possibility in the future where I can have everything that I do done by AI. And that means that I can do something more interesting with life, right? So I think applicability is going to improve. Technology is going to improve. The use cases are going to get richer and richer. And the best way for us to navigate is focus on what are the problems that give us the best results. For example, healthcare applies to everyone. All of us want to be healthy. We always have health challenges and we need some help. And having looked at what AI can bring to healthcare, it gives you this vision of what is the enormous potential that it can bring. So the classic problem is that we don't have enough doctors, but if AI can do the diagnosis, if AI can do the surgery, which it can in a guided fashion, so you can increase the reach and coverage of healthcare. So the kind of outcomes that we can drive with AI is incredible. So when you come to organizations, right? So we all know that personalities cause problems with performance, right? They're dysfunctional teams, the teams that are really functional, they've gelled together. So if you have to solve a problem where humans don't have to interact, it's AI agents interacting by themselves, they would drive a much better outcome. So when we look at AI, there are ways to outsource the problems and get AI to solve it for us. At the same time, control it in a manner where the interaction with humans is much better. So I think there is a lot of potential in the technology, a lot of potential in the future, and a lot of applications. It's us to not think about narrow applicability, but look at broader and look at much broader applicability. And not be apprehensive, and not worry about small things like biases. There'll always be problems with any technology, right? Nothing is perfect. So, and look at the potential and try and maximize it.
Make sure to turn off your, when you're, I think there can only be 4 on or something like that. But I have a million more questions, but I want to throw it out there if anyone out there has comments or questions for these fine folks. I feel like, yeah, right there.
Thank you, Rick Gray from Mayo Clinic. I want to flip the question around to the panelists and ask how you're thinking, because we think about this a lot. How are our humans going to be as coworkers to AI? And specifically the expectation that machines are perfect, and with due respect to Vijay's philosophical pursuit of perfection, we tend to be forgiving of mistakes that each other make and very unforgiving of mistakes that machines make. So having that focus is something we've been talking a lot about, of having expectations that it will be better as a team with the machines, but understanding it won't necessarily be perfect and trying to set up for that little bit of forgiveness of the machines like we have for each other. How are you all thinking about that?
So maybe I'll take that. It's a great question. There's often when we work with customers, I think what we've seen is over 80% of the recruiting organizations before they launched our application did not have a AI first product in place. So you do have an area where I'm sure, Ali, you see that as well. We're very early, right? You do have pre-AI workflows and processes and thinking, and now you're in a post-AI toolkit world. And I think it really goes back to what is the business problem we are applying it into, and the compared to what, right? So one of the powerful applications we talked a little bit about the internal mobility, which employees themselves are saying loud and clear is not being done well. So then I think you have much less pushback when you say that compared to what is 10, 15% of our employees on average proactively go and find the next job for them, versus if an algorithm's going to invite you to apply and it's a two-sided prediction and over 50% of employees click on the job we sent them to go find out more, the compared to what is, on LinkedIn and other sites, single-digit percent, right, will click and apply. And so I think it's including, when you bring these technologies in, it's including that analysis of the pre versus the post, and using the real life data of, well, even if some percentage of employees don't like the job we sent them, that doesn't mean it's bad. That actually might be because they're in finance and we had no idea, but they want to move to the product team. So, I think asking those questions of what could otherwise be perceived as negative results mean, and how do we use that to then better understand human behavior? And the AI gives us the ability to have conversations that humans maybe are having in real life, but they're not documenting, and doesn't become part of the enterprise's knowledge, right? So that exact example of, maybe I would have told my manager, you know what, I want to move off finance and into the strategy team. Manager doesn't usually then update the system. They no longer want to be in our org, especially not if they're a high performer. The AI will be the best coworker at saying, I now know this. This is really important. I'm going to go get this to someone, or I'm going to go update the systems. And so I think it's projecting 2-3 levels away from what is actually a bad outcome versus what is really important knowledge or learning that then we can then use to power the outcome, called grow the employee aligned with where they want to go.
And I think very practically, setting the benchmark and the goal is super important, right? And so this interestingly applies to like self-driving cars too, where there was this expectation that they have to be like 10x or 100x safer than human drivers before we're good with self-driving cars. I think it's a similar mindset to have with AI. Is what is the current state? How much better does the AI need to be, such that we're forgiving of certain mistakes that it might make? So like, let's say you're doing some sort of content automation use case, right? If the benchmark is, hey, this used to take us a month to do, AI is doing it in a day, but we then have to spend 2 or 3 hours, fine-tuning some of the things the AI came back with. That's a massive ROI still, right? So I think setting that context up front is very important.
So in answering the question, let me ask a question. How many of you are parents? Okay, there are quite a few. So there are 3 themes that I would touch on to answer your question. Number one is that, we always were obsessed with quality, and we explored various ways of improving quality, right? It's been there for 40 years, the quality circles and all those things. Second, we invented new techniques like Six Sigma, or pick any other techniques, to try and improve the quality and try and improve or perfect the systems that we have, or manufacturing systems or any other systems. And we as parents also, when we look at a child, our own children, we sort of try and maximize the potential to best of our ability. We may succeed, we may not succeed, but we do go guide. So why not treat AI as something similar to that and apply those techniques and say, hey, how do I maximize the potential? So to be able to do that, you need to guide the technology, have boundaries around it, set measurements. When it makes mistakes, you need to go find ways to go correct the mistakes so that it's not repetitive. And it may be a lot easier to do with an AI baby rather than a real baby, right? So I think it's far easier to control AI and be forgiving at the same time and improving much faster than what you would a real human being. So I hope that answers your question. So.
Any other questions right at the moment? Yes.
Hi, my name is Sia. I'm a student. From a student perspective, my biggest concern is when I'm writing an essay and to do with plagiarism, AI has become really big. And I'm also a teaching assistant, so my biggest concern is that how can I differentiate somebody's work using AI than their own work? Because I've seen both, where I'm using my own words, but AI say, no, I'm plagiarism, it's plagiarizing. So how can we differentiate that as a student? Because I think a lot of students are really concerned about this when they turn in their work. There's always a comments like, no, I wrote this on my own. So yeah.
I think with a lot of these technology shifts, there's this duality where you feel lock it down versus open it up. So it's very natural to say, I'm worried about plagiarism, I just need to get rid of these tools or to exclude them from the classroom or the workplace or whatever your frame of activity is. On the other hand, think about all the possibilities if you open it up. Access to education, access to what you have in the classroom is very rare. The vast majority of young people globally do not have probably access to the education, the resources, the intelligence that you have. AI could be a tutor, a personalized and infinitely patient tutor for every child. And so I think as we think about this, we have to think about the duality of what are the new possibilities if you reimagine education, but as well some of the practical things. So if we want to have something practical, something I have heard from some professors that are embracing AI is they're going back to written essays as tests, because you may use AI as a research tool and as an assistant, just as you use search, which seemed very new 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But what if you had written tests and then you're asking students to actually think and write based off of having leveraged AI to get to the point where they're being tested? So I do think there are creative, even traditional techniques around some of the things that provide us concern. But I think the more important question is what can we do? And I think you raised this as well. What can we do that we couldn't have done before? And that is the reimagine education, reimagining sales, reimagining marketing, reimagining coding. And this is a huge opportunity for us.
And one other, thing I'll say is, again, practically, it's very hard to detect if text is AI generated, like very hard. OpenAI released like a tool that was like 30% or something effective, I think. And it's only going to get harder, right, as models get better and better. And so once you have that realization, then you start thinking, okay, how can I use this technology, very much to some of the points you were raising, as a force for good, as like the next evolution in how education works, right? So there's lots of interesting things folks are doing. My brother's actually in academia. He does physics, so it's like hasn't quite, hit his world in the same way yet, but it will. And so he thinks about this a lot. And, some of the things that folks are doing to kind of adapt is more in-classroom activities, right? Like more conversations between humans, like no AI there, right? There's interesting things like that. And then I think when it comes to the take-home assignments, in some ways, like a year or two from now, maybe even now, having the expectation that like people have these tools, they're going to use them, and it's going to be hard to detect. So how can we structure the assignments in such a way that it's helping augment the education experience versus trying to combat it, and that battle is going to be a tougher and tougher one to win.
I think just thinking of the other side of what Lorena mentioned is that I'm on the board at the University of Pennsylvania, and recently with professors talking about, are students using generative AI, and what are you seeing? And one of the things that came out was students who English is not a first language are writing ever better papers and are then able to contribute their ideas and articulate in a way that previously first language skill set was the barrier to our basically sharing of their knowledge and the benefit that the classroom could have gained from that. So I think there's a lot when we say, what does this now make possible? And then how do we make that kind of awareness of those benefits so that maybe the answer is lock down certain types of classrooms from using it, but maybe the other is where I have populations that we're not hearing from. Now we've given them a platform for their voice.
Yeah. The way I think about it, that it is a problem, and the solution for that problem is not apparent. But it is a short-term problem. The reason I say it's a short-term problem is that, okay, ultimately, if you look 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if I'm able to get AI to do everything that I need to do to drive utility or value, then human beings are left alone to go pursue what they want to pursue. The plagiarism and assessments and everything is to ascribe a value to a human being, right? But if the value is being created by AI, human beings can pursue what they're pursuing without a value measurement. In which case, I don't really care about plagiarism, right? So I would say, yes, it's a short-term problem. That's only because we are locked in a short-term view. So we need to measure the person's utility, or we need to measure the person's capability, not what interests them and what they can achieve. So I think that it's a short-term problem, and I won't worry too much about it.
I kind of want to see if we can all take the conversation a little bit more long term, kind of looking into the future a little bit. I often think I've been covering AI for 2.5 years now, and as I'm covering it, I often think about my phone and how when like today, I never could have imagined that 10, 15 years ago, I never could have imagined that I would have this rectangular block that was like my best friend and that I had to carry everywhere and that I had to look at right before I go to sleep and talk to as soon as I wake up in the morning. So I often think about AI as like we can't even really see what's coming down the pike. We often fear the things that are coming over the long term, but we actually have no idea. I wonder if you guys and everyone could think about, are there things that you think people don't realize about AI as far as how the workplace will change, whether that's thinking of the coworker with a personality or, fears about job displacement. What do you think we're not really thinking about yet?
Do you want me to open this one?
Sure.
So the first study of generative AI in the workplace was done in April 2023 by included a team and a woman named Danielle Lee, who's on our science advisory board out of MIT. And so they studied almost 5,600 call center employees wrapped in a generative AI tool, coaching them on what to respond, right, as callers came in. And what they found was overall a 14% increase in productivity. They found a reduction of escalations to supervisors, which is a proxy for callers were more satisfied with the answers they were getting. They found an increased employee retention. So these people previously had churned out of roles, but they felt better about the work they were doing sooner. And they found the least experienced people were lifted the most, and a 2-month employee went overnight to a 6-month employee level of competency and capability. And I think one of the things that we're not talking enough about is if AI is shortening time to mastery or time to complete the jobs or the tasks, like that 2-month worker is now completing the amount of work and with that level of knowledge that it would have otherwise taken them a half year. What is the expectation or restlessness going to be to then move them forward quicker? And I think very few companies are thinking as that expectation and treadmill increases of now that I've mastered that and the AI has taken all of these things, as my partner, as you mentioned your phone, as my partner in completing that work faster, and then how do we then accelerate the opportunities for people, figure out a lot of the old kind of confines of minimum time and role and 2 years you have to stay in this role before you can move. That's probably not going to serve us when people have just transformed that acceleration.
I think it's interesting to also think about this question in terms of the potential trajectories that AI takes over the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a paper written about this recently where there's like kind of 3 possible trajectories. There is the, plateauing of AI. So we're not going to see significant acceleration or advancement in the next 5 to 10 years. We're reaching like a point where we've gotten the most we can out of these architectures and we just don't have enough data. So there's a plateau kind of scenario. There's a linear growth scenario. So the AI continues to grow at the pace as it's growing. And then there's the exponential growth scenario, meaning there's some new sort of advancement that happens similar to ChatGPT in November 2022, and like things look very, very different, right? And so if you consider that exponential growth scenario, like it's anybody's guess, really, right? What AI and how it'll transform the workplace in 5 to 10 years. I mean, you could imagine like all sorts of roles, looking exceptionally different, like the role of a CEO, looking exceptionally different. If you have like AI that, is just, 10x or 100x the capabilities that we have today. So that's a conversation I don't think, folks are having, and it probably is practical not to have it right now because there's a lot of uncertainty, but that is a world that's a possibility, right? More likely, what folks predict is we're going to see linear advancement and linear growth. And I think at linear in that scenario, in that world, I think there's going to be a lot of work, and this goes back to there's individual tasks that are maybe more prone to being done by AI than others. But I think there's going to be a lot where AI is kind of just very deeply embedded in the work that you do. And I don't know, by show of hands, like how many folks use AI like pretty actively in your day to day? I expect like everyone will be raising their hands, in the linear growth, even the plateau scenario over the next 5 to 10 years. And then the percent of time that you're spending maybe like wrangling AI to get you the outcome you want versus you yourself doing the work, I think that's going to grow. And I think that sort of like relationship is going to mean so many massive things in the workplace where like you can imagine like 5 years from now when you're having your performance evaluation, like part of that criteria might be how well can you prompt the AI to like get you the outcomes that you're able to deliver. So I think there's all kinds of interesting things like that are going to happen, and it's going to have like impact sort of in many different ways over the next 5 to 10 years.
So I think 2 days ago, I just woke up and said, okay, I have to speak on this panel. I knew nothing much about AI. So I started looking at what is out there. So I saw 2 interesting video clips, right? One was someone was talking about their experience with AI and Gen AI. So they built a small company with multiple AI agents, software developers, testing team, QA teams, CTO, CEO, and they set the goal for this organization of multiple AI agents to build a game, very simple game. So what they found interesting is that, the software developers agents were generating code, it was getting rejected by the QA team, and they sort of came to a bottleneck, and they escalated to a CTO, and then figured out a way to go solve the problem, and they got some measurements done from a CFO and finance kind of agent, and they ultimately produced a decent game, right? Fairly quickly, within a span of a day or 2 or less than that. And the cost of that game was hardly, I think, in cents in terms of compute costs, right? So this is like a mini workplace. Like, I'm not saying that, all workplaces will completely transform to this, but this gives you a vision of what's the art of the possible. From a personality perspective, some of the questions that you asked is, how will people interact in the workplace? So there was, I think one of the Fortune journalists was having a discussion, I can't remember, like I saw the video, and they were saying that, hey, they're worried about something in the future. They're worried that, it's easier to converse with an AI as a companion rather than talk to my own wife. So maybe I'm worried that, my conversation with my wife will reduce, and my conversation with this AI companion will increase. And what will that do to the society? It'll be a dramatically more impact than the social media problem that we see with most of the younger generations. So the way I see it is that there is a lot of promise in workplaces. So if I go project, there are concepts of digital twins, right? You can create digital twins for factories, digital twins for organizations. You can create digital twins at a very basic level, a process level, right? Industry, there are some companies out there that are trying to create an industry digital twin. So can I design an organization by using digital twin of an industry, digital twin of an organization, and then make it play it out and design an ideal organization for me, which is a combination of humans and AI? I could. So what I would think is that, okay, if you go forward 4 or 5 years, you'll see a dramatic change in workplace because we would reimagine how the workplace would be. It'll be completely different to today. And the reason I believe that that's going to happen is that one of the companies that I worked with was an engineering company, computer-aided design and machining company. So they used to design parts, or engineers used to design parts for aircrafts or something else. So they started experimenting with generative design 2-3 years ago. So what they did was that, okay, instead of engineers designing parts, they used to go put constraints, saying, hey, I want a part that's very light. I want a part that performs like this. I want a part that has this function. And the designs that they came up with, the shape of the design, the materials that gets used, the manufacturing process was dramatically different to what the humans produced, right? And it's really functional, really effective parts. So if I translate what happens in the engineering domain for a small part and extend it to organizations, the same thing is possible. So when we see an organization designed using AI and digital twins in the future, the organization may be dramatically different and far more effective. Yeah.
I think when I think about your question, maybe something for everybody to take away is this is a color outside of the lines moment.
What?
And I know. Color outside the lines. I don't think we can be deterministic that in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, this is exactly what we will see. Just as you could not have said to Sharon, your prompt on the phone, you could not have said, this is exactly the phone, this is the color, this is the use, this is the fact that I check it before I drink my coffee. Like you could not have determined it. But one of the things you could have determined is the pace of technology breakthroughs that powered these capabilities and how people started coloring outside of the lines. So the beginning of this phone was the idea of a multi-touch screen. And like that was a super brilliant moment because you said, wait a second, I could touch this. It changed the interaction. That's kind of like an LLM. Then we said, wait a second, we can design, engineering can design a screen that's a larger size. Should it be the size of a tablet? Should it be the size of a phone? I don't know. But then you started to expand the world of possibilities of what you could do. Then someone was like, wait, I could put an app. And by the way, concurrently, development costs and website design costs were starting to go down. So you had Moore's Law happening on other types of capabilities. And you're like, wait a second, that's actually really good. I didn't know I could do that. Oh, wait a second, I could actually be a startup unicorn founder because I was able to deploy an app that everybody used. Wait a second, I could shop differently now. Right. So I don't know, will we do review, like all the examples, which I love on this panel, are just the little bits of signals about a direction of change. We don't know exactly what it's gonna look like, but the reason I do think it's exponential is not the human adoption piece, it's that the fundamental technology shifts are happening faster than with the internet. So if you think of context windows, I mean, it can do, the Google context window can consume, which is like your short-term brain, like think of that as short-term memory, it can consume 20 novels. Whereas like when GPT first came out, you could put like essentially a research paper. So there's all these things from, multimodal to context windows to agentic where you could make it where the machine can actually drive to an action. So I think one of the things is for all of us humans, how do we think about coloring outside of the lines? For entrepreneurs, how do you develop businesses around that? And for the technologists, track the frontier of the technology because that's how fast we can open up the human potential. So,
Well, I think we'll have to come back next year to Park City and talk about that, how it's going. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have today. A big thank you to Lenovo for sponsoring this great session, to all our great panelists. Thank you so much. And just a reminder that we have our last morning's main stage program beginning at 9:45 in the tent. So thank you.